There's one more depressingly unfortunate aspect of God of War Ascension. After the very best boss battle in the game, there's a cutscene which displays one of the most violent things I've ever seen in a video game. It's Kratos boot stomping a Fury's face in. While the image of a woman's face being kicked in is borderline, the overall dark nastiness of the franchise and its lack of gender roles outside of the famous sex scenes kept it just inside a tonal context. But following the conclusion of the cutscenes, you get a trophy. This one, Bros Before Hoes. This gut punch of misogyny irredeemably sours this game and is shocking that such a talented developer would traffic in such a contemptible attitude. I have always liked the adult fantasy of the God of War games, that Grand Guignol silliness, and in this moment, it's all reduced to some frat house joke, making me ashamed that I ever thought it was more than that in the first place.
At no point during Killer is Dead do you have even the slightest clue about what's going on. This seriously strange hack-and-slash adventure is a disjointed mess of anime cliches, self-deprecating interludes, and the kind of outrageous jiggle physics and awkward sexism that would make even the biggest Dead or Alive fan blush.
I can't wait to see what you think of it when you actually see it play. Yes. I think you will be mind blown.
Holy shit. I just saw Cyberpunk 2077. This makes Deus Ex look like amateur hour. I love that game, but by the gods, there's no comparison. The scale, the seamlessness, the way everything just comes together so beautifully and fluidly.
After the QA, I was able to chat with Steph, Senior Global Community Manager for Deep Silver. We've been in talks since August, so it's pretty wild to finally meet in person. Though there's still a lot going on, so we only got to chat for a little bit. At this point, I took a little break and tried the tacos from the Chalupa Cabra food truck. Overall, I have to say that was one of the best intro experiences I ever had the fortune of attending, and was easily my favorite move the marketing has done so far.
The main idea I want you to take away here is that Resident Evil 4 is not the same old Resident Evil or survival horror game. It is not slow and filled with silly puzzles. The action here is enough to give you a heart attack. You will constantly find yourself among the hordes.
Now, this is a Resident Evil game, but it doesn't play like some of the Resident Evil games you might be familiar with in the past. This is more of an action game than a survival horror game.
I would actually go as far to say as that this is really not a Resident Evil game at all. This is an action game that has the overarching themes of Resident Evil mixed into it, but if you go into this thinking you're going to get a corridor shooter with lots of stuff jumping out at you in a creepy atmosphere, it's not here at all.
Or perhaps you start by digging deep into the game's story problems, or its serious issues with women. GTA 5 is a complicated and fascinating game, one that fumbles here and there and has a strain of misogynistic nastiness running through it. On the other hand, it's deeply frustrating that its world has little room for women except to portray them as strippers, prostitutes, long-suffering wives, humorless girlfriends, and goofy new age feminists we're meant to laugh at. Of course, the male characters are funny too, but in ways that deepen and complicate them as characters.
But I actually want to talk about something so much more important than Red Dead Online. Sexism in gaming. In joining G4...
This is not where I thought we were going, but I'm here.
I had no idea.
I'm listening. Yeah.
But every time G4 is brought up in various channels, even in this YouTube channel, we have the chat in front of us. I can see you. Without a doubt, there will be backlash because I'm not as bangable as the previous host. It's somehow...
Talk to him, Frost!
It has somehow been expected that you can talk about how much you jerked off to women as a compliment. It's not a compliment.
It's weird.
It's dehumanizing and it's weird.
Useless fucking pieces of shit!
When I was a teenager, I got into keeping up with the new game releases and what sites like IGN had to say about them. I viewed sites like them as credible and reliable sources when it came to covering video games. I thought they were like me or my friends, guys who really enjoy video games and appreciate what studios from around the world create for our enjoyment. Now, I wasn't hanging on their every word, but I did look at them as reliable sources for something I still enjoy today, and assumed these gaming sites were really into gaming and not there because their first career option didn't pan out for them. I eventually came across YouTube channels where there are people who talked about and reviewed games. They seemed relatable because they didn't work for a gaming website or had any connections to game publishers or developers. Individually run gaming channels were very appealing to me, especially around 2010. As we all know, YouTube has changed a lot since then. Not only that, but gaming sites have changed a lot as well. Now, I don't expect people who are in their teens or early 20s to understand how much things have changed and how greed can affect a content creator or a company that covers geek culture. I get that to some, content creators and gaming sites are the best it's ever been, but from the perspective of someone who was gaming before the PlayStation 1 came out, noticing how corrupt the gaming industry has become, it's not hard because we were there during its highs and are now enduring it at its lows. This is not to say everything in gaming has gone corrupt and no one is ever to be trusted and gaming is doomed. Absolutely not. But let's face it, the easy thing to do would be me telling you how great everything is and look forward to the new game coming out and to be overly optimistic about everything. But if I were to do that, I would be lying to you and myself. Besides, it's pretty obvious to see how abysmal modern gaming has become over the years. I want to be hopeful and optimistic about gaming. The problem is that there's so many shady gaming sites and YouTubers out and about, making it hard to have confidence that any of them can be trusted. Not saying we have to take these people for their word with everything, but if these so-called influencers can't be consistent or brutally honest with their audience, then how are we wrong for not wanting to eat up everything these sites and content creators say? We're at the point where alleged gaming journalists are not good at games, but make it abundantly clear how much they hate games and gamers, displaying their skills as an activist rather than displaying their skills as a gamer. When you watch or read one of their reviews, the things they choose to complain about are pathetic. A majority of gamers are not concerned with what these journalists find problematic. If you take a look around, most gamers are concerned with things such as a complete functioning product and knowing what the game does well and where it falls short. And since most developers try to cater to progressive weirdos, we don't have to worry about censorship more than ever. Even the articles from these disingenuous hacks show how much they despise gamers. The journalists will find any way to paint gamers as toxic, but will ignore the despicable behavior from developers or voice actors and actresses. It's made worse when YouTubers piggyback on these bogus articles when they should know better, but instead want to side with corrupted gaming sites. While it's been proven how game journalists have failed us, betraying any trust we had in them in favor of getting special treatment from publishers and developers, the same can be said for some YouTubers. For me, whenever I hear any of these people get flown out to a studio to play a game or see a game behind closed doors, it raises red flags. At that point, the person in question has been compromised, especially when said YouTuber gets more invites, more free gifts, more review codes, more behind the scenes sneak peeks, not to mention content creator programs that may or may not include free hoodies, or showing up in live streams with developers or voice actors for certain zombie games. And when all of these perks come into play, can these content creators really be trusted? Now, years ago, we had G4 as that middle ground of sorts, where it felt like something gamers and geeks in general could get behind. Gaming finally made it to TV. We had personalities that were likable, well, at the time. But sadly, G4 went away and years later it came back. A relaunch that looked promising at first. That was until you saw who would be involved, and as expected, those involved with the G4 relaunch didn't waste any time in destroying any hope of a great comeback story. Just like most of the journalists and YouTubers, G4 turned its back on its audience. While some stayed and defended the compromised clown show, many had abandoned the sinking ship. Same could be said for the gaming sites and YouTubers. Ask yourself, how many gaming sites and YouTube channels have you walked away from because of how they've changed? Whether it was due to their newfound arrogance or lust for greed. How many of them started throwing around the narrative that gaming needs to mature, how times have changed, and to adopt modern sensibilities? My issue with how corrupt gaming sites and content creators is not based on jealousy. The videos I make won't get me a round-trip flight to a developer studio or an invite to a content creator's program or a follow from a studio on social media. My issue is simple. The integrity within the gaming industry has gone to shit. Because everywhere you turn, there's someone who comes from humble beginnings, and once they find out how to make it to the top, they take every offer presented to them without any second thought. Look at it this way. How many games from gaming sites and YouTubers who got hands-on previews, flown to the studios, got review codes or collector's editions of games that ended up not being what they were hyped up to be? Or better yet, how many do you think purposely refused to review a game based on the unfinished state it was in? Think back to how the media handled Cyberpunk 2077 or The Last of Us 1 remake on PC. Cyberpunk 2077 was not the first overhyped AAA disappointment that had goofs kissing developers' asses, and the cycle will continue because people have short-term memory, and the same asshats will once again provide damage control disguised as coverage for the same studios that put out uninspired, trendy, buggy, paint-by-the-numbers, mediocre games. Rinse and repeat, the only difference being the title of the game. Funny how certain games get reviewed by these experts, but they can never stay consistent. One game gets criticized for technical issues, rightfully so, but another game shares those same issues, yet it somehow gets a pass and gets recommended. Maybe it has to do with connections with the developers, or perhaps the game promotes the same thoughts and beliefs as the reviewer. Either way, it's sketchy. Think about how many games got dumped on by gaming sites and content creators for arbitrary reasons, or because the developers didn't reach out to them for good press. Or think about how many games the usual suspects told you this game or that game was a masterpiece or the best entry in a series, and you find out this said masterpiece has noticeable design flaws or technical issues and barely resembles the series it's supposed to be a part of. There's nothing wrong with looking for a second opinion or someone who earned your trust, a familiar face or a welcoming voice. This is not exclusive to gaming. There's plenty of movie buffs or music enthusiasts we turn to for credibility or just honesty. But sometimes we have to accept people trading credibility and honesty for acknowledgement and special treatment from shady companies. Because it's one thing to be noticed by your favorite studio, but it's another thing to become a shill for your favorite studio. Whether it be a gaming site or a content creator, integrity and trust matters, especially when we're seeing studios one by one abandon integrity and trust.
No, sir, I don't like it.